The wedding venue looked like something out of a dream. Soft golden lights filled the room, flowers were perfectly arranged on every table, and a gentle music played in the background that made everything feel magical. Guests were smiling, cameras were ready, and every detail was just perfect. Backstage, Zola stood in front of the mirror, taking a deep breath. Her dress flowed beautifully around her, and for a moment, she just looked at herself. This was really happening. Her big day. The day she had imagined so many times. Then she turned, and saw her father. Alyamide stood there quietly, already dressed and waiting. The moment their eyes met, his face softened with pride. Not the loud kind, just a deep, emotional kind that said everything without words. Zola's eyes instantly filled with tears. "You look beautiful," he said gently. Zola smiled, trying not to cry. "Because of you," she replied. He stepped closer and held out his arm. There was something so strong and comforting in that simple gesture. This wasn't just a walk down the aisle. It was years of love, sacrifice, and silent support coming together in one moment. As the doors slowly opened and the music grew louder, Zola placed her hand on his arm. Her heart was racing, but she felt safe. With every step they took together, the room faded away. It was just her, and her father. And for that moment, everything felt exactly the way it should be. The reception started with laughter, music, and the soft clinking of glasses. Everything still looked beautiful. Guests were enjoying the food, taking pictures, and congratulating Zola and her husband. On the surface, it all felt like a perfect continuation of the wedding. But slowly, something began to feel off. Zola was standing near one of the tables when she first heard it. Quiet voice. Almost a whisper. Very simple setup. I expected something more. She turned slightly and saw a few members of her husband's family sitting together, smiling, but not the warm kind of smile. The kind that hides judgment. Another voice followed, a little louder this time. Well, you know her background. They did what they could. Soft laugh. Yeah, humble people. The words weren't shouted. They weren't meant to cause a scene, but they were sharp enough to cut deep. Zola felt it instantly. For a second, her smile faded. Her chest tightened just a little. She glanced across the room, her eyes searching for her father. He was talking to some guests, still smiling, still being polite like always. He hadn't heard them, or maybe he had, and just chose to ignore it. Zola forced herself to look away. She picked up her glass, took a small sip, and tried to act like everything was fine. This was her wedding day. She didn't want drama. She didn't want tension. Maybe I'm overthinking, she told herself quietly. But then it didn't stop. As she moved from table to table, greeting guests, the same tone followed her. Oh, the decorations are nice. Very modest. They kept it small, I see. I guess not everyone can afford something grand. Each comment came with a smile. Each sentence wrapped in fake politeness. But the meaning underneath was clear. They were judging, not just the wedding but her family. Zola kept smiling through it all. She nodded, thanked guests, and played her part perfectly. On the outside she looked calm, happy, unbothered. But inside something was slowly building. Not anger yet, just a quiet discomfort. A feeling that something wasn't right. And somewhere deep down she knew. This was only the beginning. The music was still playing, and the room was full of soft chatter. But the energy had started to shift. Zola could feel it. Those small comments from earlier hadn't stopped. They had just been waiting for the right moment to get louder. And then, it happened. Abina, her mother-in-law, stood up from her seat with a glass in her hand. First, it looked like a normal speech. Guests turned their heads, smiling, expecting something sweet or welcoming. Zola forced a smile too. But the moment Abina started speaking, something in her tone felt off. I just want to say, she began, her voice loud and clear across the room. We are very happy to welcome Zola into our family. Few polite claps. Then she paused, and smiled in a way that didn't feel kind. But let's be honest, she continued. We had to do a lot.
They say arrogance is the calm before the storm. But for Grant Caldwell, it was a hurricane he never saw coming. He stood in the finest steakhouse in Manhattan, raising a glass of 50-year-old Scotch, bragging to his associates about how he had just pulled off the divorce of the century. He thought he had stripped his wife Nora of everything her shares her dignity and her future. He believed he was the king of the jungle. But Grant forgot one crucial rule of business: never underestimate the person who built the throne you sit on. He thought the war was over. He didn't realize that Nora hadn't just signed the divorce papers. She had just signed his eviction notice. The sound of crystal clinking against crystal rang out through the private VIP room of the Obsidian, one of the city's most exclusive members-only clubs. The air smelled of aged leather, expensive cigars, and tonight, the overwhelming stench of hubris. Grant Caldwell loosened his silk tie. His face flushed with the kind of victory that only comes from destroying someone you once promised to love forever. "To the prenup!" Grant bellowed, raising his glass high. Around the table, a chorus of laughter erupted. Sitting with him were his sycophants, Baxter, his ruthless corporate attorney, Wyatt, his VP of sales, and a few other hangers-on who enjoyed the proximity to Grant's wealth. "You really cleaned her out, didn't you, Grant?" Wyatt asked, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "I mean, I heard the rumors, but zero equity in Caldwell Logistics." Grant took a long, satisfied sip of the Scotch. It burned going down, a feeling he loved. Zero. They say arrogance is the calm before the storm, but for Grant Caldwell, it was a hurricane he never saw coming. He stood in the finest steakhouse in Manhattan, raising a glass of 50-year-old Scotch, bragging to his associates about how he had just pulled off the divorce of the century. He thought he had stripped his wife Nora of everything her shares her dignity and her future. He believed he was the king of the jungle. But Grant forgot one crucial rule of business: never underestimate the person who built the throne you sit on. He thought the war was over. He didn't realize that Nora hadn't just signed the divorce papers. She had just signed his eviction notice. The sound of crystal clinking against crystal rang out through the private VIP room of the Obsidian, one of the city's most exclusive members-only clubs. The air smelled of aged leather, expensive cigars, and tonight, the overwhelming stench of hubris. Grant Caldwell loosened his silk tie. His face flushed with the kind of victory that only comes from destroying someone you once promised to love forever. "To the prenup!" Grant bellowed, raising his glass high. Around the table, a chorus of laughter erupted. Sitting with him were his sycophants, Baxter, his ruthless corporate attorney, Wyatt, his VP of sales, and a few other hangers-on who enjoyed the proximity to Grant's wealth. "You really cleaned her out, didn't you, Grant?" Wyatt asked, shaking his head in mock disbelief. "I mean, I heard the rumors, but zero equity in Caldwell Logistics." Grant took a long, satisfied sip of the Scotch. It burned going down, a feeling he loved. "Zero, Wyatt. Big fat zero. She gets the lake house in Michigan, which has a leaking roof, by the way, and a lump sum that wouldn't buy a parking spot in this city. But the company, the fleet, the proprietary tracking software, all mine." Baxter, the lawyer, chuckled darkly. "It was a master class, really. We argued that since Nora hadn't been active in the office for the last 3 years, her contribution to the company's current valuation was negligible. The judge ate it up." "Negligible," Grant repeated, savoring the word. "She spent the last 3 years taking care of her sick mother. Noble, sure. Profitable, no. While she was playing nurse, I was expanding into Europe. I built this empire. She just decorated the lobby." The men laughed again. It was a cruel, jagged sound. "But wasn't she?" Didn't she write the original code? One of the younger associates asked hesitantly. He was new, still naive. The room went quiet for a split second before Grant waved a dismissive hand. Ancient history, kid. That was version 1.0. We're on version 12 now. Whatever code she wrote 10 years ago is obsolete. Just like her. Grant checked his phone. A text message from Paige popped up. Are you free yet? I'm waiting at the penthouse. Champagne is on ice. Grant grinned. Paige was 24, a brand ambassador for a luxury fashion line, and she looked at Grant like he was a god. She didn't ask about supply chains or overhead costs. She didn't nag him about his cholesterol or ask why he was home late. She just wanted to party, and Grant felt 20 years younger when he was with her. Gentlemen, Grant announced, standing up and buttoning his jacket. As much as I love recounting my legal triumph, I have a celebration of a different sort to attend to. Give Paige our best. Wyatt winked. Grant smirked. Oh, I will. Tomorrow morning, the ink dries on the divorce decree. And at 10 a.m., I walk into the boardroom to sign the merger with Global Stream. Once that signature is down, Caldwell Logistics becomes a global superpower and my net worth triples. Nora will be crying in her Michigan shack while I'm buying an island. He threw a stack of $100 bills onto the table to cover the tab, an unnecessary flex, but one he couldn't resist. Drink up, boys. We won. As Grant walked out of the club, strutting past the doormen who nodded with deference, he felt untouchable. He had the money, the girl, and the freedom. He had cut the dead weight of his marriage. He didn't notice the black sedan parked across the street with tinted windows. He didn't see the camera lens that snapped a photo of him stumbling slightly as he got into his limo. And he certainly didn't know that inside that sedan sat a private investigator named Coulter, who was currently on the phone. He's leaving the club now, Mrs. Caldwell, Coulter said into his headset. He looks happy. On the other end of the line, Nora's voice was cool, calm, and terrifyingly steady. Good, she said. Let him be happy for 12 more hours. I want him to feel safe. To understand the magnitude of Grant's mistake, you have to go back, not just a few months, but 15 years. Back then, Grant wasn't a tycoon. He was a frantic, sweaty guy in a cheap suit trying to pitch a trucking business to investors who wouldn't give him the time of day. He had the charisma, sure. He could talk a starving dog off a meat truck. But he had no structure. He had no system. It was Nora who built the engine. Nora Davis had been a quiet genius, a logistics wizard who saw patterns where other people saw chaos. When they met, Grant was running 3 trucks and losing money on every mile. Nora took one look at his ledger and found the leaks. She rewrote his routing algorithms on the back of a napkin during their 3rd date. You're driving in circles, she had told him, pushing her glasses up her nose. If you switch to a hub and spoke model for the tri-state area, you save 40% on fuel. Grant had stared at her wide-eyed. Marry me, he had joked. 2 years later, he wasn't joking. They married at the courthouse because they couldn't afford a big wedding. Every spare dollar was being poured into the company. For the first decade, they were a perfect team. Grant was the face, the loud, brash front man who shook hands and closed deals. Nora was the brain. She sat in the back office, buried under monitors, coding the proprietary software that made Caldwell Logistics faster and cheaper than everyone else. She created the web, a dynamic tracking system that could predict traffic delays before they happened. But as the company grew, the dynamic shifted. Grant started hiring real executives, men in expensive suits with MBA degrees who spoke over Nora in meetings. He started telling her she needed to focus on soft skills, or suggested she take a step back to enjoy the fruits of their labor. "You don't need to be in the server room anymore, Nora," he'd say, patting her hand patronizingly. "We hire people for that. Go shopping, join a club." And then came her mother's illness, Alzheimer's. It was brutal and slow. Nora stepped back from the day-to-day operations to care for the woman who raised her. She trusted Grant. She trusted him to run the company they built together. She trusted him to respect her legacy. That was her first mistake. While Nora was changing bedpans and managing doctor's appointments, Grant was rewriting history. He stopped inviting her to board meetings. He removed her name from the website's Founders page. He started referring to the company as My Empire in interviews. And then he met Paige. The affair wasn't even subtle. Receipts for diamond necklaces Nora never received. Business trips to Cabo San Lucas. Late-night texts. Nora wasn't stupid. She just didn't have the energy to fight him while her mother was dying. When her mother finally passed away 6 months ago, Nora was exhausted, grief-stricken, and vulnerable. That's exactly when Grant struck. He served her the divorce papers 3 days after the funeral. "It's just not working, Nora," he had said, feigning sadness while checking his watch. "We've grown apart. I'm a CEO of a multinational corporation, and you're in a different place." He offered her a settlement that was insulting. He threatened that if she fought him, he'd bury her in legal fees for decades. He told her the prenup they signed, a flimsy thing downloaded off the internet 15 years ago, gave him everything because the intellectual property clause was vague. "I have the best lawyers in the city, Nora," he had sneered during their final mediation. "You can take the lake house and the cash, or you can end up on the street. Your choice." Nora had looked at him. Really looked at him. She saw the graying hair he dyed to look younger. She saw the insecurity masked by arrogance. She saw a man who had forgotten where he came from. "Okay, Grant," she had said softly. "I'll sign." Grant had been stunned by how easy it was. He thought she was broken. He thought she was weak. But Nora wasn't broken. She was just done playing by his rules. What Grant didn't know, what his expensive lawyer Baxter hadn't bothered to check, was that the web, the software that ran the entire company, wasn't actually owned by Caldwell Logistics. 15 years ago, before they incorporated the main company, Nora had registered the copyright for the core code under her maiden name. She had licensed it to the company for $1 a year, a contract that auto-renewed annually, unless, of course, the licensor chose to terminate it. And that contract had a very specific clause: in the event of a change in majority ownership or a merger, the license becomes null and void immediately unless renegotiated. Tomorrow, Grant was signing a merger with Global Stream. Nora sat in her small apartment. She had already moved out of the mansion and looked at the clock. It was 11 p.m. She picked up a thick document on her desk. It was a cease and desist order, drafted by her own lawyer, a shark named Mr. Sterling, who made Baxter look like a kitten. She picked up her phone and dialed Sterling. "Is everything ready for the board meeting tomorrow?" she asked. "It's all set, Nora," Sterling's gravelly voice replied. "We have the process server ready to intercept him the moment he tries to sign the merger. But are you sure you want to do this? Once we pull this trigger, there's no going back. You'll burn the company to the ground." Nora walked to the window and looked out at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, Grant was with his mistress, drinking champagne, celebrating his victory. "I'm not burning the company down, Mr. Sterling," she said, her voice cold as ice. "I'm just taking back my engine. If Grant wants to drive the car, he can try pushing it." The sun rose over the city, like a spotlight turning on for the final act of a play. In the penthouse suite of the Meridian Tower, Grant Caldwell woke up with the kind of headache that usually signals a bad decision, but he interpreted it as the lingering taste of success. He rolled over. Paige was still asleep, her arm thrown carelessly over her eyes. The sheets were Egyptian cotton, the thread count high enough to suffocate a man. But Grant felt like he was breathing pure oxygen. Today was the day. Payday. He dragged himself out of bed and walked to the floor-to-ceiling windows. 40 stories down the city crawled with ants, people going to jobs they hated, driving cars they couldn't afford. Grant sneered. He wasn't one of them anymore. After today, he would be in the stratosphere. He checked his phone. 3 missed calls from Baxter, his lawyer. Grant rolled his eyes. Baxter was always panicking about dotting I's and crossing T's. Grant texted back, "Relax. I'll be there at 9. Make sure the coffee is hot." He stepped into the shower, the steam filling the marble enclosure. As he scrubbed, he rehearsed his speech for the merger signing. He would be humble, fake, humble, of course. He would talk about synergy and legacy. He wouldn't mention Nora. She was erased. She was a footnote in the biography of a billionaire. By 8:30 a.m. Grant was dressed in a bespoke navy suit that cost more than most people's cars. He knotted his tie, a crimson-red power tie, and looked in the mirror. "You're a king," he whispered to his reflection. "And kings don't apologize." He left Paige sleeping and took the private elevator down to his waiting car. Meanwhile, 5 miles away, in a modest rent-controlled apartment block, the atmosphere was very different. Nora Davis stood in front of a small, cracked mirror in her hallway. She wasn't wearing the oversized cardigans and sensible slacks Grant had mocked for the last 5 years. Today she wore a sharp, charcoal-grey pencil skirt and a blazer that looked like armor. Her hair, usually pulled back in a messy bun, was blown out, straight and sharp. She looked at her reflection. She saw the lines around her eyes from sleepless nights caring for her mother. She saw the slight grey at her temples. But for the first time in years, she didn't see a victim. She saw the woman who had written the code that revolutionized an industry at 2 a.m. on a kitchen table. Her phone buzzed. It was Mr. Fairbanks. She had swapped out Sterling, the junior associate, for Fairbanks, the firm's senior shark, for today's kill. "The car is outside Nora," Fairbanks said. His voice was deep, calm, and dangerous. "Are you ready?" Nora picked up her briefcase. Inside was the original patent filing from 15 years ago, a document Grant hadn't looked at since the Bush administration. "I'm ready," Nora said. "Remember," Fairbanks warned, "he's going to try to bully you. He's going to try to shame you. He's going to bring up your mother. He will do anything to rattle you." "I know," Nora replied, her hand tightening on the door handle. "But he's forgetting one thing." "What's that?" "I know where the bodies are buried," she said, "because I dug the graves." She walked out the door, leaving her old life behind. At the headquarters of Caldwell Logistics, the mood was frantic. Junior analysts were running around with binders, secretaries were arranging fruit platters, and the IT department was on high alert to ensure the video conference with the European partners didn't lag. Grant swept into the lobby like a hurricane. "Good morning, Mr. Caldwell," the receptionist chirped. Grant didn't even look at her. "Get me a double espresso, and tell maintenance the ficus plant in the corner looks dead. If it's not replaced by the time I come out of the meeting, you're fired." He marched to the elevator, enjoying the fear radiating off his employees. This was power. When he reached the top floor, The executive suite Baxter was waiting for him. Baxter looked pale. He was sweating, wiping his forehead with a handkerchief. "Grant, thank God," Baxter hissed, pulling him into a side office. "We have a problem." Grant laughed, clapping Baxter on the shoulder. "Baxter, you always have a problem. That's why I pay you." "What is it?" "Did the caterer bring the wrong bagels?" "It's not bagels, Grant," Baxter said, his voice trembling. "I was doing a final due diligence sweep on the asset list for Global Stream. The IP transfer protocols. They're flagging an error." Grant waved a dismissive hand. "It's a glitch. The system is just overloaded. We're merging databases. Ignore it." "I can't ignore it, Grant," Baxter insisted. "The system says we don't have admin root access to transfer the source code. It says the master key is held by an external user." Grant froze for a second, then scoffed. "External user, I'm the admin. I built this place." "Technically," Baxter mumbled, "Nora built the system." Grant's face darkened. "Nora hasn't logged in for 3 years. Her password is probably password 123. Just override it. Call IT and tell them to force the transfer." "I did," Baxter said. "They can't. They said the code is hard locked. If we try to force it, the system initiates a defensive wipe." Grant stared at him. A defensive wipe? That sounded like something out of a spy movie, not a trucking logistics company. "You're being paranoid," Grant snapped. "Just get the papers ready. Lars Jensen is going to be here in 20 minutes. If there's a technical hiccup, we'll fix it after the check clears. Do not, I repeat, do not mention this to Lars. If he smells fear, he'll renegotiate the price." Baxter swallowed hard. "Okay, Grant. But if the software doesn't transfer—" "It will," Grant growled. "Because I say it will." He adjusted his tie and walked out, leaving his lawyer looking like a man walking to the gallows. The boardroom of Caldwell Logistics was a masterpiece of intimidation. A 30-foot table made of reclaimed mahogany walls of glass overlooking the harbor, and chairs that cost more than a mid-sized sedan. At the head of the table sat Grant Caldwell. To his right, the terrified Baxter. Across from them sat Lars Jensen, the CEO of Global Stream. Lars was a Viking of a man, 6'4", blonde, ice-blue eyes, and known in the business world as the Butcher of Stockholm, for how ruthlessly he dismantled companies he acquired. Lars tapped a gold pen against the table. "My team has reviewed the financials, Grant. The numbers look aggressive." "Aggressive is how we win, Lars," Grant said, flashing his winning smile. "Our web tracking software cuts delivery times by 18%. That's pure profit. You're not just buying trucks. You're buying the brain of the operation." Lars nodded slowly. "The software, yes. That is the jewel in the crown. Without the software, your company is just a bunch of used trucks and a lease on a warehouse." "Exactly," Grant said. "And that software is proprietary, owned 100% by Caldwell Logistics." Lars looked at his own lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Cross Waite. "Cross is forbidden." A sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Vance. "Waite Vance is forbidden." A sharp-eyed woman named Ms. Reeves. Ms. Reeves nodded. "The paperwork seems in order, Mr. Jensen." Lars smiled a cold, thin expression. "Very well. Let's sign. I have a plane to catch." Grant felt a rush of euphoria. This was it. The finish line. He picked up his pen. The heavy double doors of the boardroom swung open with a loud thud. Grant's head snapped up. "I said no interruptions." Standing in the doorway was not a secretary with coffee. It was Nora Davis, flanked by Mr. Fairbanks, who was carrying a briefcase that looked like it contained nuclear codes. The room went silent. "Nora?" Grant asked, half in shock, half in fury. "What the hell are you doing here? You don't work here. Security." He reached for the phone, but Nora walked into the room, her heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. She didn't look at Grant. She looked directly at Lars Jensen. "Mr. Jensen," Nora said, her voice clear and projecting to the back of the room. "I apologize for the intrusion, but I believe you are about to purchase stolen property." Lars Jensen stopped tapping his pen. He looked at Grant, then at Nora. "Who is this?" "This is my ex-wife," Grant spat, standing up, his face turning red. "She's unstable. She's upset about the divorce. Nora, get out before I have you arrested for trespassing." "Sit down, Grant," Mr. Fairbanks boomed. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of a judge's gavel. "And you might want to call off security, unless you want a lawsuit for unlawful detainment added to your problems." Lars Jensen held up a hand. "Wait." He looked at Nora with interest. "Stolen property. That is a serious accusation. Explain." "Grant," Baxter whispered, frantically tugging on Grant's sleeve. "We need to get them out of here." "I'm handling it," Grant hissed. He turned to Lars. "Lars, ignore her. She's trying to sabotage the deal because she didn't get enough alimony." "It's pathetic, really." Nora finally looked at Grant. Her eyes were devoid of the love she used to hold for him. They were empty. "I don't want alimony, Grant," she said. "I want what's mine." She nodded to Fairbanks. The lawyer opened his briefcase and slid a single thick document across the mahogany table toward Lars Jensen. "What is this, Lars asked, picking it up. "That," Fairbanks explained, "is the original copyright registration for the web source code, dated October 14th, 2008. As you can see, the registrant is Nora Davis, not Caldwell Logistics." Grant laughed nervously. "That's a technicality. We were married. What's hers is mine. The prenup covers all assets. Actually," Nora cut in, "it doesn't." She took a step closer to the table. "You were very specific about the prenup, Grant. You wanted to protect your premarital assets, your 3 trucks. You insisted that anything we brought into the marriage remained separate property, unless explicitly commingled. I wrote the code before we signed the marriage certificate. It is a premarital asset." "But the company uses it," Grant shouted, sweat starting to bead on his upper lip. "We've used it for 15 years, under a license agreement," Nora said calmly. "A license I granted to the company for $1 a year." She pulled another paper from her pocket and placed it on the table. "And this," she said, "is a formal notice of termination of that license, effective immediately." The silence in the room was deafening. Lars Jensen picked up the termination notice. He read it, then looked at his own lawyer, Ms. Reeves. She was frantically typing on her laptop, checking the database. "She's right," Ms. Reeves whispered, her face pale. "The IP due diligence shows the code is licensed, not owned. The license has a change of control clause. If Grant sells the company, the license expires unless the owner, Nora, renews it." Lars Jensen dropped the paper. He looked at Grant with a mixture of disgust and pity. "You tried to sell me a car without an engine," Lars said quietly. "Lars, listen." Grant stammered, his hands shaking. "It's just code. We can rewrite it. I have a team of developers. It took you 10 years to optimize that system," Lars snapped. "If I sign this deal today, the software stops working tomorrow." "Actually," Nora interjected, checking her watch, "it stops working in about 2 minutes. Grant's eyes bulged. "What did you do?" "I revoked the admin keys," Nora said. "The system checks for a valid license every 24 hours. The server just pinged the license registry. It found a revoked status." Suddenly, the lights in the boardroom flickered. Outside the glass walls in the main office bullpen, chaos erupted. Through the glass, Grant could see his employees standing up, staring at their monitors. The screens had all gone black, replaced by a single line of text in bright green command line font, "License expired." Contact System Administrator. Phones started ringing. The logistics board, a massive screen on the wall that tracked thousands of trucks across the globe, went dark. "The fleet," Baxter whispered, horrified. "The drivers. They can't see their routes. They can't log deliveries. The entire supply chain just froze." Grant looked at the blank screens. He looked at Lars Jensen, who was putting his gold pen back in his pocket. "The deal is off," Lars said, standing up. "And Grant, I'm going to sue you for fraud. You tried to sell me an asset you didn't own. My legal team will be in touch." Lars walked out, his entourage following him. Grant was left standing alone at the head of the table. His empire was crumbling in real time. The phones were screaming. The stock price was likely already plummeting as news of the system failure leaked. He looked at Nora. He expected her to be gloating. He expected her to scream and yell. But she just looked at him with a sad sort of pity. "You bragged about winning the divorce, Grant," she said softly. "You were so focused on taking the money you forgot who made the money." "Fix it," Grant begged, his voice cracking. He slumped into his chair, the arrogance completely gone. "Nora, please, turn it back on. I'll give you half. I'll give you anything." Nora shook her head. "It's too late for that. You wanted a clean break. You got it." She turned to leave. "Wait," Grant screamed, scrambling over the table. "What am I supposed to do?" Nora paused at the door. She looked back over her shoulder. "I suggest you learn how to drive a truck," she said, and then she closed the door. The silence in the boardroom was replaced by a cacophony of chaos the moment Nora's elevator chimed, signaling her departure from the floor. Grant stared at the mahogany door she had just walked through. For a fleeting second, his brain refused to process the reality of the situation. It was a denial mechanism, a psychological firewall trying to protect his ego from total annihilation. She's bluffing, he thought. She has to be bluffing. Nobody destroys $100 million company just to prove a point. But the screaming from the bullpen outside shattered his delusion. Grant stumbled out of the boardroom. The scene before him was apocalyptic. The Caldwell Logistics operations floor, usually a humming hive of productivity, was in total meltdown. "I have a driver in Nevada carrying 20 tons of frozen seafood." A logistics manager was yelling into a headset. "He doesn't know where the drop-off is because his tablet is bricked. If he turns off the reefer unit, that cargo rots in 4 hours." "The medical supply shipment to Chicago is missing," another voice shrieked. "The GPS is dead. We don't know where the truck is." Wyatt, the VP of sales, who had been laughing with Grant at the club just the night before, ran up to him. His face was grey. "Grant, the dashboard is gone. The client portal is showing a 404 error. Amazon just called. They're threatening to pull the contract if we don't give them a location update in 10 minutes. What do I tell them?" Grant loosened his tie, his breath coming in short, shallow gasps. Tell them it's a server maintenance cycle. Tell them it'll be up in an hour." "I can't tell them that," Wyatt shouted, losing all deference for his boss. "The system isn't just down, Grant. It's wiped. The IT director said the source code didn't just lock. It uninstalled itself. It's like the operating system of the company just vanished. Grant pushed past him, marching toward the server room. He needed to find someone to blame, someone to yell at. He burst into the IT department. The server racks, usually blinking with millions of frantic green lights indicating data transfer, were ominously static. Solid red lights pulsed slowly like a dying heartbeat. The IT director, a young man named Kevin, was sitting on the floor with his head in his hands. "Fix it," Grant roared. "I pay you 200 grand a year. Type the code back in restore from backup." Kevin looked up, his eyes bloodshot. "There are no backups, Mr. Caldwell. The backups were stored on the cloud server. The cloud server access is tied to the license key. When the license was revoked, the cloud provider locked us out automatically. It's in the terms of service. We have nothing. We are a logistics company that doesn't know where its trucks are." Grant felt the room spin. He grabbed a desk to steady himself. "Call Nora," Grant rasped. "Get her on the phone." "I tried," Kevin said quietly. "Her number is disconnected." The rest of the day was a blur of nightmares. By 2 p.m., the news had leaked. CNBC ran a breaking news banner: "Logistics giant goes dark. Caldwell fleet paralyzed." By 3 p.m., the stock price of Caldwell Logistics had plummeted by 60%. Trading was halted by the SEC due to volatility. By 4 p.m., the bank called. Grant was hiding in his office, the blinds drawn, drinking the scotch he had saved for the victory toast. When his private line rang, he picked it up, hoping it was Lars Jensen calling to say he'd reconsider. It wasn't Lars. It was Mr. Henderson from First National Bank. "Mr. Caldwell," Henderson's voice was clipped and professional. "We've been monitoring the situation. Given the catastrophic loss of operational capacity and the pending lawsuit from Global Stream regarding the failed merger." "It's a glitch, Henderson," Grant lied, slurring his words slightly. "We'll be back online tomorrow." "We can't take that risk," Henderson said. "We are exercising the material adverse change clause in your loan agreements. We're freezing the company's credit lines effective immediately. Also, since your personal assets were leveraged as collateral for the expansion loan last year." Grant's blood ran cold. "What no?" "The house is in a trust." "The penthouse is not in a trust, Mr. Caldwell, nor is the yacht. We are initiating asset seizure protocols to cover the margin call. You have 24 hours to liquidate enough liquidity to cover the $40 million gap. Good day." The line went dead. Grant dropped the phone. He walked to the window and looked out. The city looked the same, but he was no longer a king. He was a man standing on a trap door that had just opened. He needed to go home. He needed Paige. She would comfort him. They would figure this out. They could go to the Cayman Islands. He had some cash stashed there. They could start over. He grabbed his jacket and ran for the elevator, ignoring the screaming employees demanding answers in the hallway. When he got to the lobby, he saw his driver standing by the limo. But there was a problem. A tow truck was backing up to the vehicle. "What are you doing?" Grant screamed, running out onto the sidewalk. "That's my car!" The tow truck driver, a burly man with a cigarette hanging out of his mouth, didn't even flinch. "Bank order, pal. Repo." "I'm Grant Caldwell. You can't repo my car." "Take it up with the bank," the man said, hooking the chains to the bumper. Grant watched, humiliated, as a crowd of pedestrians stopped to film the scene with their phones. He covered his face and hailed a taxi. It was the first time he had been in a yellow cab in 10 years. The seat smelled of stale pine air freshener and sweat. It was a smell he was going to have to get used to. Grant unlocked the door to the penthouse, his hands shaking. The apartment was quiet. Too quiet. "Paige," he called out. "Babe, I'm home. It's been a rough day." He walked into the living room. It was empty. The abstract art on the walls was gone. The sculptures were missing. He ran to the bedroom. The closet door was wide open. Paige's side was stripped bare. Her designer dresses, her shoes, her handbags, everything he had bought her over the last 6 months was gone. On the bed sat a single piece of paper, not a letter. A printout of the Wall Street Journal article titled, "Caldwell Empire Crumbles, CEO Accused of Fraud." Next to the paper was her key to the apartment. No note. No, I love you. No, we'll get through this. Just the cold, hard math of a transaction concluded. The money was gone, so she was gone. Grant sat on the edge of the bed and laughed. It was a manic, broken sound. He had traded a woman who built his empire for a woman who looted the ruins. The next 3 months were a slow-motion car crash that the entire world watched with glee. Without the web, Caldwell Logistics couldn't fulfill its contracts. Clients sued for breach of contract. Perishable goods spoiled in trucks, sitting in parking lots, leading to massive insurance claims the company couldn't pay. Lars Jensen didn't just walk away. He went for the throat. He sued Grant personally for fraudulent inducement, arguing that Grant had knowingly misrepresented the company's assets. Because Grant had signed personal guarantees to get the deal done quickly, the corporate veil was pierced. Grant's lawyers, the expensive ones, quit when the retainers bounced. He was forced to hire a public defender-level attorney who looked tired before the case even started. The bankruptcy court was ruthless. First went the yacht, then the Hamptons house, then the collection of vintage watches. Finally, the penthouse. On the day of the eviction, Grant stood in the lobby of the Meridian Tower with 2 suitcases. That was it. That was all he had left. The doorman, a guy named Henry, whom Grant had never tipped in 5 years, held the door open. "Good luck, Mr. Caldwell," Henry said. The tone wasn't malicious, but it wasn't kind either. It was indifferent. Grant was just another tenant who couldn't pay the rent. Grant walked out onto the street. It was raining. A cold grey drizzle that soaked through his suit, a suit that was now 3 months old and starting to fray because he couldn't afford the dry cleaner. He had nowhere to go. His friends from the club, Wyatt, the guys he drank scotch with, had blocked his number weeks ago. They were busy distancing themselves from the toxic fallout of his reputation. He checked into a cheap motel near the airport, the kind of place where the neon sign buzzes all night and the sirens never stop. He sat on the lumpy mattress and stared at the peeling wallpaper. He had one option left. One Hail Mary. He pulled out his phone. He had saved Nora's new business number. He had seen it in a magazine. Business Insider had done a feature on her last week, The Phoenix How Nora Davis Built a Tech Giant from the Ashes. She had launched her own logistics consulting firm, Davis Systems. She was licensing the web directly to trucking companies, now cutting out the middleman. She was making millions. Grant dialed the number. His hand trembled. "Davis Systems. How may I direct your call?" A pleasant receptionist answered. I need to speak to Nora Davis," Grant stammered. "May I ask who is calling?" "It's Grant. Grant Caldwell." There was a long pause. "One moment, please." Grant's heart hammered against his ribs. She would take the call. She had to. They had history. 15 years. Maybe she would take pity on him. Maybe she would offer him a job. He would take anything. He would sweep the floors. The line clicked back on. "Mr. Caldwell." "Yes, is she there?" "Mrs. Davis is in a meeting with the board of directors," the receptionist said politely. "However, she left a message for you in case you called." "What is it?" Grant asked, clutching the phone like a lifeline. "She said to tell you that she hopes you find what you're looking for. And she said to remind you that the hard karma you used to talk about in your seminars. Well, she said to tell you that the bill has come due." "Wait, please." Click. Grant stared at the phone. The screen went black. He was alone. Truly, completely alone. He lay back on the bed and closed his eyes. He thought about the steakhouse, the 50-year-old Scotch, the way he had laughed about Nora's shack in Michigan. He realized now that the shack had something his penthouse never did. It had a foundation. Grant Caldwell had built a castle on sand, and the tide had finally come in. But the story wasn't quite over. Fate, it seemed, had one final twist of the knife left for him. A chance encounter that would show him exactly how far he had fallen. 6 months had passed since the eviction, but for Grant Caldwell, it felt like 6 lifetimes. Time moves differently when you are poor. When you are rich, time is a commodity you manage. When you are destitute, time is a burden you endure. Grant stood in the service corridor of the Grand Olympus Hotel, adjusting the collar of a white polyester shirt that was 2 sizes too tight. It scratched his neck, a constant itchy reminder of his new station in life. He wasn't Grant Caldwell, CEO, anymore. To the staffing agency that hired him, he was just employee number 492, a temporary banquet server making minimum wage, plus tips if the guests were generous. And tonight, the guests were very rich. He looked in the reflection of a stainless steel warming tray. His face was gaunt. The stress of the bankruptcy had aged him 10 years. His hair, once dyed and coiffed, was now thinning and streaked with aggressive patches of white. He hadn't been able to afford a haircut in 8 weeks. "Hey, new guy," the floor manager. A 20-something kid named Kyle, with a power complex, snapped his fingers in Grant's face. "Stop staring at yourself. We need champagne flutes on tray 6. The VIPs are arriving. Move it." "Yes, sir," Grant mumbled, grabbing a heavy tray of crystal glasses. The irony was suffocating. The event tonight was the annual Logistics and Supply Chain Summit. For the last decade, Grant had been the keynote speaker at this very gala. He used to sit at table 1 center stage, drinking the 50-year-old Scotch and holding court. Tonight, he was pouring the water. Grant pushed through the swinging doors and entered the ballroom. The noise hit him first, the low roar of expensive conversation, the clinking of silverware, the generic jazz band playing in the corner. It smelled of roasted duck and money. He kept his head down, terrified of being recognized, yet painfully aware that to these people, servers were invisible. They were furniture. He navigated through the crowd, offering champagne to men he had once played golf with. He saw Wyatt, his former VP of sales. Wyatt was laughing at a joke told by a man from a rival shipping firm. Grant paused, his heart hammering. If he just spoke up, if he just said, "Wyatt, it's me," maybe Wyatt would help him. Maybe he'd slide him $100 or offer him a couch to sleep on. Grant stepped forward. "Sir, champagne." Wyatt turned. He looked directly at Grant's face. Grant held his breath. "Recognize me," he pleaded silently. "See me." Wyatt's eyes glazed over Grant without a flicker of recognition. He grabbed a glass. "Thanks," he muttered, turning his back immediately to resume his conversation. "So anyway, the market is pivoting to AI-driven routing." Grant lowered the tray, his hands shaking. He wasn't just ruined. He was erased. He had ceased to exist in their world. He retreated to the perimeter of the room, trying to catch his breath. That's when he saw her. Paige. She was standing near the ice sculpture, wearing a dress that shimmered like liquid gold, a dress that cost more than Grant's entire debt settlement. She looked radiant, untouched by the chaos she had left behind. She wasn't alone. She was hanging on the arm of a man who looked vaguely familiar. It was Conrad Holloway. Wait. Holloway is forbidden. It was Conrad Banks, a real estate mogul, known for his ruthless evictions and terrible toupee. He was 70 if he was a day, and he was currently whispering something into Paige's ear that made her giggle, that same vacuous, rehearsed giggle she used to use on Grant. Grant felt a surge of bile rise in his throat. Anger, hot and blinding, momentarily overcame his shame. He walked over, abandoning his tray on a nearby table. "Paige," he said, his voice raspy. Paige turned. Her smile froze. She squinted at him, confused for a microsecond, before the realization hit. Her eyes widened, not with love or pity, but with pure, unadulterated disgust. "Grant," she whispered, looking around quickly to ensure no one was watching. "What are you doing here? You look terrible." "I work here," Grant said, gesturing to his stained uniform. "I'm the help. Funny, right?" "It's not funny, it's sad," Paige hissed, stepping closer to block Conrad from seeing him. "Please don't make a scene. Conrad hates drama." "You left me," Grant said, the words tumbling out. "You cleared out the apartment. You took the watches. You took the cash. I took what I earned." Paige snapped, her voice cold as dry ice. "I put up with your ego for 2 years, Grant. That was hazardous duty pay. And frankly, considering you lied about your net worth, I should have taken more." "I loved you," Grant said, though even as he said it, he knew it wasn't true. He loved how she made him look. "You loved the mirror I held up for you," Paige corrected him sharply. "Now go away before I call security. You're embarrassing me." She turned back to Conrad Banks, slipping her arm through his and beaming up at him. "Ready for dinner, darling?" Grant stood there, hollowed out. He had been discarded like an empty champagne bottle. "Ladies and gentlemen," the announcer's voice boomed over the speakers, dimming the lights. "Please take your seats. It is time for our keynote address. Please welcome the CEO of the year, the founder of Davis Systems, Nora Davis." The room erupted in applause. A standing ovation. Grant froze. He was standing in the shadows near the kitchen doors. He watched as the spotlight hit the stage. Nora walked out. She looked magnificent. She wasn't wearing the grey suits of her past. She wore a sleek midnight blue power suit that commanded authority. She didn't look tired. She looked energized. She looked like a titan. She approached the podium, adjusting the microphone. She didn't use notes. "Thank you," Nora said, her voice warm and steady. 15 years ago, I wrote a line of code on a kitchen table because I wanted to help my husband's trucking business save money on fuel." The crowd chuckled. "I didn't know then that I was building the foundation of modern logistics," she continued. "I stayed in the background. I let others take the credit. I thought that being a good partner meant making myself small so someone else could feel big." Grant felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. She was talking about him, but she didn't mention his name. He was just a nameless anecdote in her success story. "But I learned a hard lesson," Nora said, leaning into the mic. "Innovation without integrity is just a hustle. You cannot build a legacy on the backs of people you don't respect." When I reclaimed my technology 6 months ago, people said I was ruthless. They said I destroyed a company. She paused, scanning the room. For a terrifying second, Grant felt like her eyes locked onto his in the darkness. "I didn't destroy anything," Nora said firmly. "I simply turned the lights on. And when the lights came on, the structure collapsed because it was rotten. Today, Davis Systems is announcing the acquisition of the